Floyd Mayweather has said it more times than anyone can count. I'm not scared of any opponent. If I'm scared and I'm a coward, why do you guys want to see me fight? 50 fights, 0 losses, and an entire career built on the specific, unshakable belief that fear was something that happened to other fighters, never to him. But listen closely enough to his own words, across enough interviews given over enough years, and something else starts to surface underneath the bravado. Not fear exactly. Mayweather would never use that word about himself. Something closer to it, though. The specific, careful caution of a man who understood precisely which risks were worth taking, and which ones simply were not, no matter how much money or glory sat on the other side of them. 5 names explain that caution better than any highlight reel ever could. Start with the one nobody outside the sport even remembers. A name that once made an entire welterweight division quietly step aside. Number 5. Paul Williams. Picture a fighter standing 6'2" at welterweight, absurdly tall for the division, with arms so long that opponents described trying to hit him as reaching through fog. He threw over 100 punches around without slowing down, an output nobody else in the weight class could physically sustain. And by the time he beat Antonio Margarito in 2007, serious boxing people had started calling him the most avoided man in the sport. Mayweather never fought him, not once, not close. The excuses shifted depending on who was asking. Wrong timing, wrong network deal, wrong style matchup for the fans. But strip away the promotional language, and what remains is simpler. A fighter with Williams's exact dimensions, exact reach, exact suffocating output, represented precisely the kind of stylistic nightmare that even Mayweather's own camp quietly steered him away from. Williams never got the fight. He never got the answer either. Now picture a version of a fighter Mayweather did eventually face, except younger, sharper, and considerably more dangerous than the man who actually stepped into the ring with him. Number 4. Miguel Cotto. By the time these two men finally fought in May of 2012, Cotto had already been beaten by Antonio Margarito, already been stopped by Manny Pacquiao, already absorbed years of championship-level punishment that had worn something away from what he used to be at his absolute peak. That earlier version, the one who terrorized Madison Square Garden in his mid-20s, body punches folding grown men in half, relentless forward pressure that made opponents fight defense first and offense second, was never the man Mayweather actually shared a ring with. Even against this later, diminished version, the fight still went the distance, still produced moments where Cotto's pressure genuinely made Mayweather work harder than the final scorecard suggested. What happens to that equation with a prime Cotto instead, 5 years younger, 5 years sharper, is a question that boxing historians still debate. The version of Cotto that actually stepped into that ring was not the version the sport remembered most. The next name did get his fight, but only after the risk had already been quietly managed down to almost nothing. Number 3. Canelo Alvarez. September 14th, 2013, MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas. Canelo walked in undefeated, 23 years old, already a rising star in his home country, with the kind of raw power that experienced trainers watched carefully in fight footage. On paper, this looked like Mayweather finally accepting genuine risk against a young, dangerous opponent, still building toward his prime, rather than fighting past it. Except the terms told a different story entirely. Mayweather insisted on a catchweight, a contracted limit below Canelo's natural fighting weight, forcing the younger man to drain his body down further than he had ever needed to before a fight. It weakened him, subtly but unmistakably, before either man had thrown a single punch. Mayweather also selected the venue, the timing, the entire framework surrounding a fight that had been sold to the public as a genuine test. He won a clear, comfortable decision, outlanding Canelo on every scorecard across 12 one-sided rounds. Canelo's own trainer at the time later admitted the catchweight had drained his fighter's power before the opening bell ever rang, a young champion forced to shrink his own body to fit inside a number Mayweather had chosen specifically for him. It looked like risk. It behaved like something closer to a calculation, every variable outside the actual fighting arranged carefully in advance. The next name represents the longest, most expensive act of hesitation in the history of the sport. A fight the entire world demanded for 6 straight years before it finally happened far too late to mean what it should have. Number 2. Manny Pacquiao. By 2009, Pacquiao had become the most electrifying fighter on the planet, a southpaw whose speed and combination punching had already ended championship reigns across 4 different weight divisions. The fight the entire sport wanted, needed, demanded was Pacquiao against Mayweather, 2 era-defining talents finally settling the argument in the ring. It took 6 years to happen. Drug testing disputes, contract disagreements, promotional conflicts between rival companies, purse negotiations that collapsed and restarted more times than anyone could accurately count. Each obstacle had its own specific, defensible explanation in the moment. Together, across 6 years, they added up to something that looked from almost every outside angle like delay for its own sake. When the fight finally happened in May of 2015, both men were well past the versions of themselves the public had actually wanted to see collide. Pacquiao was 36, carrying a shoulder injury he had not properly disclosed. Mayweather won clearly, controlling distance for 12 largely uneventful rounds against a diminished opponent. The fight that should have happened never did. What arrived instead was its ghost, 6 years late, robbed of exactly the stakes that had made everyone want it in the first place. And then there is the one name Mayweather never fought at all. The one opponent whose absence from his record comes with an explanation delivered in Mayweather's own words that sounds less like strategy and more like something else entirely. Number 1. Antonio Margarito. Picture a fighter built like a wall closing in, relentless, seemingly impervious to pain. A man who absorbed championship-level punishment round after round and simply kept walking forward regardless of what landed on him. At his physical peak, Margarito was considered one of the single most dangerous welterweights on the planet, avoided by nearly the entire division for the exact same reasons that made him must-watch television for everyone else. Mayweather never stepped into a ring with him, not once, across an entire era when both men shared the same weight class and the same sport. Years later, finally asked directly why that fight had never happened, Mayweather gave an answer unlike anything he had ever said about any other opponent across his entire career. He was beating fighters with loaded gloves, Mayweather said, referencing the hand wrap scandal that later got Margarito suspended. "I'm glad that God never let that fight happen, because you don't know what kind of effect that would have had on my career after boxing is over. He could have ended up killing me in the ring." Read that sentence again. He could have ended up killing me in the ring. This is not the language of a man discussing a business decision or a promotional scheduling conflict. This is the specific, unguarded honesty of a fighter admitting, in his own words, that one particular opponent represented a level of physical danger he was simply unwilling to risk his life against, regardless of the money or the legacy attached to making that fight happen. 50 wins, 0 losses, a career built entirely on the public insistence that fear was a word that never applied to him. And yet, when the subject of Antonio Margarito finally came up, the most careful, most calculating fighter of his generation said the one thing he had spent an entire career refusing to say about anyone else, that this man could have killed him. 5 names. 5 different shades of the same specific caution. Williams, whose style alone was reason enough to stay away. Cotto, whose most dangerous version Mayweather made certain he never had to face. Canelo, whose risk was carefully managed down to almost nothing before the bell ever rang. Pacquiao, whose fight arrived 6 years too late to mean what it once would have. And Margarito, the only name Mayweather ever discussed in terms that sounded unmistakably like fear. He will never call it that. He never has, not once, across an entire career built on refusing the word. But he said it anyway, about one man, in his own voice, without a trace of the bravado that defined everything else he ever told the world. He could have ended up killing me in the ring. If you want more deep dives into the untold stories behind boxing's greatest careers, hit subscribe. The best stories are still coming.